All right. So thank you guys for having me tonight. I'll try to keep it relatively brief for you guys. But I put together some notes because we're coming up on a midterm here, as we all know. And midterms can be a struggle for us as whatever party happens to have the White House at the time. And we need to keep an eye on our strategy. And as I've sort of been in the conservative space for a while, I've realized it seems like no matter how many times we win an election in this pendulum swing back and forth, we'll have a Democrat for a few years, and we'll have a Republican. It seems like even though the pendulum has swung the farthest right it has in quite a while, the left is still winning the culture war in many regards. Now we're pushing back, we're making some headway. I believe it was the Plastic Surgery Association, whoever it was, recently came out and said we're not going to endorse transgender surgeries for minors anymore. That's good. That's really good news. They need to not endorse it for anyone. It's just me, maybe. But somehow, we're still experiencing losses in culture. And I think we can blame this on poor strategy. Some people like to call our side the silent majority. But I don't think that's really true. Because I looked at the numbers. Republicans and Democrats have similar voter turnouts in pretty much every election. We tend to do better in the midterms as far as turnout goes. They tend to do better in the presidential. But all in all, it's pretty similar. Online, we've got a lot of conservatives who are speaking their opinions, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of it. So I don't think it's that we're quiet. I think it's that we're ineffective. And I'm here to present to you tonight as brief as I can, because I have a lot of pages of notes. I have this bad habit of when I write notes, I just write and write and write and I never stop. But I'll keep it to 3 points. And these are areas where we as Republicans in the last couple decades, me coming into the tail end of it, I'm not more than 2 decades old myself, 2.5 now, we've accepted the liberals' premises. And when you're having a conflict with someone, imagine you're in the trenches, the First or Second World War, the team that gets to decide the battlefield is the team who's going to win, because they will pick the battlefield that is most to their advantage. If you're in a debate and you let the other team decide on the definitions and decide on the rules of engagement, you're probably going to lose, and I think that's what we've done to ourselves. So the first pitfall that we as conservatives have fallen into in the last few decades, that will continue to cut the feet out from under us every single time we want to win permanently, and not just ping pong back and forth with the election cycle, is secular neutrality. A lot of us have a misunderstanding about our American founding principles. We have this idea that our country is very beautiful and it's founded fundamentally on the principle of individual liberty, liberty above all else. And as a consequence of this liberty, after liberty, you have the choice to be maybe a Christian or at least a moral person, and that makes our country a nice place to live. But let me tell you, that's completely inverted. We are not a good Christian country because we were free to choose that. We were a good Christian country. Our founders, by and large, were believers. They had Christian ethics. Even those who weren't quite Christians in the usual sense were from a Christian culture, right? That's the reason we have freedom. So understand, I want to make my point clear. Freedom follows morality. Morality doesn't follow freedom. And so the reason for that is that when people are good, it's safe to be free. Have you guys ever been on like a school field trip and one of the students is misbehaving, right? They're touching things in the museum they're not supposed to be touching. If that happens, there's a pretty good chance the school's going to get a phone call and your school's not going to be allowed to go on that field trip anymore. That is an example of someone's bad behavior, someone's misuse of their liberty turning into a lack of liberties for everyone else. Same thing happens at the grocery store. Too many people decide they're going to shoplift hair conditioner. Next thing you know, the hair conditioner is behind a lockbox and you have to go track down one of the invisible Walmart associates to unlock it for you. This is a consequence of people abusing their free will, and it means we lose our liberties. And so conservatives drop the ball when it comes to social issues because we make that mistake of assuming that liberty comes first and then morality later. What we need to do instead is say we need to be a moral Christian country, not just in name, but in practice, which means we need to legislate our morality if we don't want to lose our liberties. I hear a lot of conservatives say things like, homosexuality doesn't bother me as long as it's consenting adults, right? Nobody should legislate what goes on in your own house. That sounds very libertarian, right? I've heard many people say this. Or they'll say something like, I don't agree with abortion, definitely wouldn't do it myself, but it's really none of my business. We need the government out of healthcare. That's what we need. And that's an example of some libertarian or even liberal logic slipping in, where the liberty of people to do what they want has superseded our morality. That's a mistake. You'll get people saying things like, I disagree with transgenderism and I don't want them doing it to minors, but if you're over 21, I don't really care what you do with your body. Well, that's a problem. And I think these can all be summed up with the central idea that the beauty of America is you can do whatever you want as long as you don't infringe on someone else's rights. The consequence of this is what we see around us today. We no longer enforce laws about lewd behavior. We've allowed promiscuity to become normalized. There are despicable things on TV you should never allow your kids to watch. We've enshrined civil rights protections, the highest level of protection we have for homosexuality, which the Bible calls an abomination. And we've consistently accepted pushes by liberals and libertarians to legalize dangerous drugs. Is this the country we want to live in? I don't think so. If you accept in principle that it doesn't matter what people do as long as it doesn't affect you, those behaviors will take root and grow until it does affect you. And so I'd like to present that our founding fathers never intended religious liberty to be abused with license. They understood that religious liberty was based on a presumption of moral decency. If you're not going to be decent, you forfeit your rights. That's called a jail. John Adams famously said, our Constitution was only made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Most colonies at the time of the institution of the First Amendment still had rules on the books requiring a theology test if you're going to have office. You had to have at least some semblance of Christianity in your head if you were going to hold office. You could get put in the stocks for not going to church. Now I'm going to go on the record and say I'm not supporting stocks for people who don't go to church. My point is, when the Founding Fathers wrote the First Amendment, they were not allergic to enforcing their morality with the law. They were not afraid to legislate morality. Their chief objection was to using the power of government to force allegiance to a particular denomination. And I think we'd all agree, no, I don't want the government telling me to go to the Church of Christ versus a Baptist church. Let me exercise that as I see fit. But also, the government does have a role in telling me what I can't do if it's going to corrupt society. So if this idea of secularism didn't come from the Founding Fathers, where did it come from? Well, it came from the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period of history that's really a big leftist experiment that was run by and influenced by voices such as Voltaire, Kant, and Rousseau. And let's see what kind of beautiful quotes these gentlemen had to say. Voltaire says, Christianity is the most ridiculous, the most absurd, and the most bloody religion that has ever infected the world. Voltaire praised England, he said, because the laws do not trouble themselves with religious opinions. Is this the heritage of the ideology that we really want influencing us as conservatives? We need to have no part of this. Secularism is not your friend. Kant said, moral law comes from human reason. This is not a direct quote, but I'm describing his views. He thought moral law comes from human reason, the will is self-legislating, and obedience to God is unnecessary for morality. He says, quote, the moral law is given by pure reason alone. And Rousseau taught similarly. So, if someone tells you that, well, I'm glad you're a Christian, feel free to exercise that in the privacy of your own home, just don't try to enforce it on us. Let's have a religiously agnostic society. That doesn't work. These guys were not religiously agnostic, and they're the authors of the ideology that really has infected us today. So I would encourage you, as the first point, let's not accept secular neutrality, because neutrality doesn't exist. The second pitfall that I think we fall into is cultural globalism. Let me tell you, Western civilization is the most successful and beautiful civilization the world has ever seen. And I'm not just speaking idly because I'm a part of Western civilization. Think of any invention you can, any significant scientific discovery. Every single one of these, since up until maybe the 1700s, was discovered within a little square. If you were to draw a circle on a map of the world over Europe, almost every discovery the human race has ever had was within that little circle that was Europe. Why was that? Was it because they were superior in any genetic way? No, not at all. But because the presumptions that were put into Europe when Christianity spread enabled them to be a successful, law-abiding people. It's very difficult to do science when you have warring Muslim, chiefs, ripping up everything. So the Christian presumptions of Western civilization allowed us to be successful. And the anti-Christian left hates that. And so I think it's really helpful to view our political and social struggles as a function of this historical controversy between the West, which is predominantly Christian, right, and the East, so to speak, which is Muslim. And of course, we can't oversimplify it. I'm not going to say that that's the only conflict the world's ever seen. But the anti-Christian left has historically hated the Christian monarchy, they've hated the papacy, they've hated the church, and as a result, they've needed ammunition to take us down in the West. And right now, America is the leader of the West. As a result, they use race and colonialism as our Achilles heel to try to bring us down. They teach that the Christian West, who they like to make it racial, they like to say it's white men. Really, it's just Christianity in the West. But they say it's the white men are the bad guys in every story, responsible for everything from poverty to climate change to obesity. I've literally heard the left say that obesity is the fault of the Christian white man. It's ridiculous. They try to tell us that we're the worst thing that's ever happened to the world. Now, most of us in this room don't accept that, but we accept their tool, which is mass migration. So what they'll do is they'll say that our culture is not better than anybody else's. A society built of mud huts in Africa is just as beautiful and just as glorious in its own way as a cathedral. Doesn't your logic and reason tell you that's not the case? Again, it's not that the people who build the mud huts are inferior in any way. That's a lie of the left. That's a caricature of your views that the left wants to put out there. They want you to believe that you're racist, and maybe they want to convince you to become racist, but you shouldn't. You have to be a realist, though. And you have to acknowledge that there's something intrinsically good about Western civilization that we must defend. And the kings of Babylon and the kings of, or the emperors of Rome understood that when you mix a people in with other people groups, they lose their cohesion and they lose their strength. God, when the Israelites were taking over the promised land, God told them, hey, don't leave behind any of the foreign peoples. Why did he say this? Because you're going to marry into them, you're going to share your culture, and they're going to share their false gods with you, and you will just not be the people I wanted you to be. And so, while most of us are against illegal immigration, I'm in a room full of Republicans. We elected Donald Trump in 2024 on a platform of mass deportations. A lot of conservatives accept ideas that are really a gateway drug for this problem. They say things like, we're against illegal immigration, yes, but we love legal immigrants. We want even more, actually. Let's make it easier to get all the immigrants who want to come into America here. They'll say things like, America is just an idea. We welcome anyone who wants to ascribe to what it means to be American. They're great for our culture and we love their food. The fact is, it doesn't matter if immigration is legal or illegal. That's a technicality. If you have too much of it, you will dilute what it means to be an American. We used to use what was called the national origins formula. From 1920 to the 1960s, we would never have accepted the idea that we need to bring in as many people as possible from other cultures. Thomas Jefferson warned us when he was still alive. He said, if you import as many foreigners as possible, it will lead to, quote, an incoherent and distracted mass. Benjamin Franklin said, if you import too many Germans, he says, they will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us, instead of us anglifying them. There's a certain peak capacity that any given people group has before you start to change the character of the group. If you move Democrats into this room, sneak them in one by one, they're welcome to come as visitors, I would assure you, but I'm sure you could testify, if we had 60% Democrats in this room, are we really having a Republican meeting? That's what a caucus is for, right? And so, our Western way of life, the way we do things, our presumptions about our legal system and the way we want to live is really unique in the world. Other countries don't live like we do. And that's fine for them. If that's what they want to do, I support their right to exist and have their liberties and to maintain their culture and be proud of it. It's a beautiful thing. That doesn't mean we need to bring them here, right? If the left really wants diversity, they would oppose mixing everyone together in a big melting pot that just boils them all together. What about all the beautiful traditions of Europe? The parts of Italy that make Italy distinct, the parts of Belgium that make Belgium distinct. If you just mix them all together, you lose all those individual characteristics. And so I think we can shrug off accusations of racism, and we can insist on restoring the vision of immigration that served us well in the past decades, which is from people who believe like us and think like us, and came from the place that we came from because we like the way we turned out. It's okay to insist in a Western country that only Western civilization be allowed. How am I doing on time? Am I doing okay on time?
I haven't been timing you.
Okay, well, I got one more point. I got one more point to make. I think the third pitfall we can make is conservatives. And maybe this is, well, you can rank in your own head which is the most important, but feminism. Nobody in this room is probably a raging third-wave feminist who wants abortion rights and LGBT. I get it, we're Republicans. But my thesis of this sort of presentation is that sometimes we're maybe a little more in alignment with those people than we think we are. Because I hear a lot of people, my wife and I, we got married at 24, we had a lot of people telling us, are you sure you want to get married so early? Maybe put it off and enjoy your life a little bit. Why? Isn't a significant goal in life to be married? Certainly not everyone does get married, and that's fine. God certainly calls some people to singleness or gives them the gift of celibacy. But by and large, getting married is a significant part of God's design for the world. We should encourage our children to get married and have children. And yet my wife and I are not the only ones to hear this. A lot of people casting aspersions on that. And then when we were finally married, they said, well, maybe you'll wait to have kids because you want to keep your freedoms. Really? Again, with this individual liberty being like the chiefest of all ends, what happened to noble sacrifice and investing in the next generation? And so I would hope that as we grow older and I eventually have kids who grow up, and of course you guys, many of you have kids or even grandkids already, let's not discourage them from doing the things that make life meaningful. Let's encourage them, hey, get married young. Take that risk. Let me help you out in whatever way I can to enable that to happen, especially in this terrible economy. The other thing, people will say is, young women, you need to go to college. It's a default. Everyone's got to go to college because otherwise you will be relying on a man. That's kind of what marriage is. If you can't trust your spouse, you probably shouldn't get married. And so it makes absolutely no sense for the vast majority of young women, and a good amount of young men, let's be honest, college is kind of a scam, even though I went, to saddle themselves with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, waste 4 of the best years of their lives just so they can get indoctrinated by liberals on a college campus. So I would say if you have young people in your life, don't tell them not to get married young. Don't tell them not to have kids. Don't tell them they need to go to college and plant seeds of doubt in their mind about whether maybe your marriage won't last. Encourage them to do the right thing. A lot of people will mention Proverbs 31 as well as sort of this platform to get into feminism. And they'll say, well, the Proverbs 31 woman, she was like a business owner. Well, the Proverbs 31 woman was industrious and hardworking. She makes textiles with her hands, I believe is what it says, and she sells them in the market. That is the ideal work of a person who's being productive because she is doing what she can with what she has and she's bringing a profit to her household. But bear in mind, this is not King Solomon telling us that the ideal woman is a Fortune 500 CEO, right? She's going to the market selling her home goods. So I think we need to stop viewing the goals of the left, which is every mother in a cubicle, every father on the factory floor, every child in a daycare or in a public school up until they graduate and then they're just in college. That's a liberal frame of mind. You are not going to raise a thriving conservative generation in that mindset. It has to completely change. The priorities have to switch. And I think that starts by taking them out of public schools if we can. Now we're going to elect some people pretty soon to the school board because we have a school board, and I hope that they will help to dismantle some of the bad ideas that are probably in that school board. There is a place for public school, don't hear me saying that there's not a place for it. But as it currently exists, it's an institution that's very bad for our movement. And so these ideas are fashionable, right? But they're not conservative, and they're not consistent with the ideal society we want. So I'll wrap up. I hope these points have been thought-provoking. My goal has been to not warn you against things that you already know to be warned of. Nobody in here is voting for LGBT rights. Nobody in here is voting for mass migration. Nobody in here is voting for radical third-wave feminism. But let's bear in mind the times that we accept the assumptions that are critical to leftist thought, we're really just planting the seeds that are going to grow in the next generation, which will make it that much easier for them to accept the liberal ideas that we hate today. So let's bring Christian ethics back into government by legislating our morality again. And this means returning to church ourselves, being Christian and moral ourselves, so that our own individual persons and our families are being raised the way we want our country to be raised. It also means insisting on Western culture and European heritage as core tenets of American identity, and recognizing that it's the people who live in a place who make it what it is. You can't separate those things. And then finally, it means recognizing and pushing back on all forms of feminism and returning to traditional marriages with a lot of kids, building homes the way God designed. It's worked for many, many generations, and it will work in the future. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and I'll hand it over to whoever happens to be next.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much. Good job. Tyler has a beautiful wife and a daughter back there, and I heard her making a little bit, I think she was gonna clap for her daddy, but she ain't up to clapping yet, but she was telling him he was doing a good job, I'm sure.